Pyron here. I'm going to go through some slides. I have a couple of videos to update what's going on at the Georgia Ports Authority. I got some facts and figures to talk about and what's going on. This is a key sector for us. I'm very pleased to be back here again. I addressed the group, was it 2 years ago? Yeah, 2 years ago. But it is just so important to us, and there's nothing more important to us as a Port Authority and also Georgia for profitable, sustainable yield force management. It is just really, really critical because it is a big piece of what we export. And we're going to talk a little bit about that. So really quickly, going to talk about the properties at the Georgia Ports Authority, just a little bit of a setup. Just going to go through this really quickly for those of you that may not be totally aware of everything that we're doing. We're responsible for 5 deep water ports in Georgia. We're an authority of the state of Georgia, and we have also just opened our first inland port in northwest Georgia, a town called Chatsworth. So again, that is Georgia Ports Authority run, Georgia Ports Authority operated. It's part of a short haul inland port strategy that we have in concert with what we're going to be doing with long haul intermodal strategy too, because of the trucking crisis that's going on in the United States now. There's with ELDs, hours of service, and all those things are just playing very, very heavily in terms of how we look at the long term, and we have to develop strategies that are going to allow for continued sustainable growth. And we're also trying to be good stewards, trying to get as many trucks off the road as possible in as green a way as possible. We have 3 facilities that really service the forest products industry. I'm just going to go through them really quick. One of them is here in Brunswick at Mayor's Point. Again, mostly break bulk and bulk operations. Another at Ocean Terminal, that's up in the Savannah area. That's a purpose-built break bulk facility, about 200 acres, where we're doing a lot of import pulp as well as exports. So a lot going on there in terms of all that. But really, sort of our 800-pound gorilla is the Garden City Terminal here. And it represents about 90% of the revenue of the Georgia Ports Authority. And while all the other facets of our business continue to grow at a very healthy pace, I must say, it's just the container growth just is dwarfing everything else and continues to grow. In the 11 years I've been here, when I first got here, the revenue represented about 81% of the Georgia Ports Authority. 11 years later, it's now 90% of our revenue. And again, while all the other factors are, all the other facilities are growing. Just to look at this, it's really quite unique, and scale is one of the reasons for the success of the ports here in Georgia. There's nothing like this anywhere in the Western Hemisphere. At 1,200 acres or 486 hectares, it's 3 times the size of the next single biggest marine terminal facility in the United States. It is also the only port, the only terminal on the U.S. East Coast that has both Class 1 East Coast railroads on dock or on terminal. We built and operate those facilities for Norfolk Southern and CSX. You can also see a lot of groundwork being done as we spent about $200 million to tie those facilities together. And we're going to talk about that a little bit and how that's going to extend our reach, help us to be able to continue to grow. So again, nothing quite like it. About intermodally, about 21% of everything that we're doing today is intermodal, and that is going to continue to grow. It's going to have to grow. So our plan is by 2028, 2030, that number is going to be about 26 to 28% of everything that we're moving intermodally. Numbers, you can read faster than I can talk, but it was a great year for the Georgia Ports Authority. While the top 10 ports in the U.S. only grew at about 2.7%, we again grew at 7.6%. So that's versus 8.3% the year before that, 10.5% the year before that. But the world is slowing down a little bit. And for some of the reasons that Dana has talked about, our exports have been tremendously impacted by what's going on with the tariffs. We haven't really seen that impact yet on imports. In fact, the Walmarts or the Amazons, the Home Depots, the Lowe's, Targets, they're telling us that their numbers are holding up fine. They're going to continue to enjoy a peak season. But our exports have really been battle tested here the last year. So it'll be interesting to see what's going to happen. And it's really interesting to me coming over to the port side after 11 years in international shipping, and I lived in Hong Kong for a good bit of my life, that when you look at port stats, They're actually lead economic indicators as opposed to lag economic indicators. So when you're looking and seeing what's happening at ports with either growth or declines, certain commodity sectors and everything else, it's really a bellwether of what's going on or what's going to happen in the economy. But again, just a record year for the Georgia Ports Authority. We have been the fastest growing port in the United States for the last decade. Again, you can see for the last 10-year comparison, growing at about 5.2% per year on a compounded annual growth rate basis. In fact, we had one of our former board members here, Joe Hopkins, was on our board for 8 years and just a great leader, served the board faithfully. So I attribute all this growth to Joe's leadership here. So. But it's really tremendous. But when you really compare what's happening in LA and Long Beach, and Long Beach actually in the last 6 months has actually gone negative. The Port of New York, New Jersey, the big difference is when you look at the ports of LA and Long Beach, you have 13 terminals in those two port authorities. In the Port Authority of New York, New Jersey, which is one port authority, you have 6 terminals there. Well, the Port of Savannah, it's all in one single facility. So when you think you're doing almost 4.5 million 20-foot equivalent units or 4.5 million containers a year, all on one facility, it really bespeaks to scale and why those things are so important to retailers and to the supply chains, and has really just continued to lead to why Georgia continues to grow, not only for retailers and importers, but exporters, manufacturers, just continues to be a great success. This is the number of services that we have on a weekly basis. You can see that we have as many services on a weekly basis as the Port of New York, New Jersey does, who is still a little bit bigger than us. Probably mathematically, we could potentially catch New York within the next 8 to 10 years, which would be kind of exciting. I won't be here to see that, but it would be pretty cool if that happened. We are typically the first port of call for everything that comes through the Panama Canal, and it's been a big, big game changer for the Georgia Ports Authority. Another thing there, it's not a very detailed map of the East Coast, which I apologize for, but if you look at the Port of Savannah, we're actually the westernmost East Coast port. That may sound kind of weird, or you might say, so what? We're actually due south of Pittsburgh. So what that means, logistically, in terms of highway miles, in terms of rail miles to reach major metropolitan cities, we can get there quickly, efficiently, cost-effectively. So, logistics is like the flow of water. It's always going to take its easiest, most efficient course. So we have become kind of that gateway of choice because of a lot of efficiencies that we enjoy. Quick video on some of the expansion that's going to be happening at the Georgia ports. I call this the Game of Thrones video, which we'll see in a minute. Over 100,000 feet of rail track. So it's very exciting with everything that's going on at the Georgia Ports Authority. As an entity of the state, being an authority and not an agency, we're expected to earn our own keep. We don't receive any subsidies from the state of Georgia, but we are mandated to reinvest 100% of our profits back into our port facilities. And we are really, really fortunate in our space that we're really the only port authority that has zero debt. I mean, when you look at what other port authorities are doing with the heavy borrowing that they're doing, trying to keep up with what we're doing, and we're financing everything that we do through our own revenues, which is pretty exciting. I talked about the inland ports before and why that's important for us, why it's important for Georgia. We really touch every part of Georgia. You can see the Appalachian Regional Port, which we've already opened. We have 2 others that we are talking about opening soon. Again, we're doing this just to basically extend our reach more efficiently throughout the state of Georgia and to basically incubate economic development. And we're already seeing this in our Northwest Georgia port. We have GE Appliances just announced that they're going to be building a 520,000 square foot distribution center. So they're going to be importing about 5,000 to 6,000 containers a year that'll be coming through the port, moving on the train from our terminal and directly up in this area. So it's incubating all those kind of things that we've been trying to do, that's been part of our strategy, and that's simply to help continue to grow jobs in Georgia for Georgians. This is just a little bit about the port, so it's just very, very exciting. It sits on 42 acres up there, and it's really turning out to be a real success. We're moving almost 2,000 containers a month up there now. I talked a little bit about what's going on at the port with our rail facility here and why that's important to maybe some people in this room, to be able to reach markets further away, to be able to do that more efficiently. But we're spending about $200 million to basically create this space, this footprint on our terminal that's going to allow us to move 2-mile, 10,000 foot trains that are going to allow us to reach more efficiently all the way into the Midwest, which we're really not doing here today. We're going to Atlanta, Memphis, Huntsville, Nashville, and Charlotte with our rail services, but we really haven't reached beyond that. But we have major retailers, manufacturers coming to us saying that we're so tired of the West Coast or having problems in New York. How can you help me with my cargo, going to and from the Midwest? So it's these kind of investments, these kind of strategic investments that are going to keep the Georgia Ports Authority ahead of the curve. This is what's going on with the rail, so everyone can see, because all this is underway. In fact, this is a little bit dated. It's probably about a month and a half or 2 months old. The ability to scale, to be fluid, to have the kind of velocity that we have at our facility just brings tremendous benefits to the supply chain. It's been with the great roadway and highway system that we have in the state of Georgia, the great rail infrastructure as well as the port, all these things in combination have really continued to propel us and keep us way ahead growth-wise in terms of everything else that you see that's happening in the country. Quick review on the forest products. Again, talked about how key this is to us. Again, we are the #1 port on the U.S. East Coast for forest products. You can see even ahead of New York, New Jersey in terms of the way the pie is developed there at about 25%. New York, New Jersey at 21%. That's total forest products. That's also total tonnage, not necessarily the containers. Now what's happening with break bulk is everyone knows that there has been a conversion has been taking place ever since I've been here, that break bulk cargo continues to convert into containers. So our break bulk numbers have continued to go down. You can see that the imports in break bulk have continued to hold pretty good, but export break bulk has continued to drop, and it's just a function of what's going on in the marketplace. Ocean rates being as low as they are, that more and more that migration into containers happens all the time. But on the container trade, you can see that forest products have continued to grow at about 7% per year. So again, we grew at 7.3% in our last fiscal year here. So very steady growth, very, very healthy growth. But obviously the concern now with the headwinds with what's going on between the U.S. and China, because that's having a big impact on us, especially on the logs. And we've seen the repercussions of all that. Also, if you look at 31% of the U.S. East Coast forest products, you look at how big we are of forest products in container exports. So we looked at total tonnage before, but in terms of just container exports, we're in fact the largest in the U.S. I mean, if you took waste paper out of the equation that's going off the west coast of places like India, because it's not going to China anymore, that we just continue to be #1 in that sector. And if you look at, as we were talking about before, forest products being 3 of the 4 top container export commodities here between the wood pulp, paper and paperboard, the logs and lumber, how important this has been for the Georgia Ports Authority. So you can see the way all the other commodities kind of stack up there. But this is just a key sector for us, and we're just very, very hopeful that the administration and President Xi in China, that they're able to work through these things, and again, being very supportive of everything that the administration is doing. We're just hopeful for the benefit of trade and commerce that some of these things can be worked out and resolved sooner as opposed to later. So really, when we're going around the world seeing ocean carriers, and when we're seeing the beneficial cargo interests in different parts of the world, or major third-party logistics providers, this is really the model that we're talking about, that we call the Savannah model, and it's really kind of unique, having the size and scale that we have. 4th busiest container port in the U.S., fastest growing, most services on the East Coast, the only port to have 2 Class 1 railroads on terminal, great, fast, and convenient infrastructure with both the highways and the rails. The near port DCs, when I started here 11 years ago, we had about 40 million of Class A industrial warehouse space. Now we have 62 million and 9 million more square feet coming on board. And that's just in the Savannah area. So the growth in the Savannah area has been huge. It's continued to move up towards the Macon area and into Atlanta. So we happen to be the biggest, the #1 state for distribution center growth as well. So Georgia is deemed as a very, very attractive place to be. Ample amounts of containers are coming in. There's always going to be ample amounts of containers for export products, and especially for forest products. You're never going to have to worry about the equipment availability, even with the synthetic resins that are going to begin coming out of the Gulf, or the grains that are coming out of the Midwest. There's always going to be an abundance of container equipment for the forest products sector. And then just great port partnership with the state of Georgia, the ILA that's on our port, U.S. Customs Border Protection, everyone involved in the supply chain. It's just been a great success story, and thanks to everyone in this group that really continues to really drive forth the Georgia Ports Authority. So thanks for everyone's time, and open up for any kind of questions. Thank you.